Good morning, teacher and everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello everyone. This morning our group is going to present about second language acquisition, and our group includes two members. My name is Bảo Thư, and I will. I am in charge with the first two parts. What is second language acquisition and theories of second language learning. And Miss Phụng Tú, my partner, will be in charge with the learner language and instruction and second language acquisition. Let's start with the first part. What is second language acquisition? Second language acquisition research focuses on the developing knowledge and use of language by children and adults who already know at least one other language. And this field of research has both theoretical and practical importance. So as you can see on the screen, there is the differences between theoretical and practical theories. And second language learning theories has two main types of theories, psychological and linguistic theories, and both of them have influenced research in second language acquisition. And we are moving to the first theory, linguistic perspective. And do you have ever heard about universal grammar, or we call UG? This theory originated with Chomsky in 1968 and based on his view on first language acquisition. And he inferred that children must have an innate language faculty. And he proposed about the idea of the language acquisition device, or we can call LAD, and also different data between competence and performance. It is widely accepted that at least a plausible explanation for the first language acquisition, and there is a critical period for language acquisition, and nowadays UG is no longer available to older learners because these are not specific to second language acquisition by older learner, and it's more difficult than for younger learners, and it's never complete. And beside that, the researcher may ask a language user to judge whether a sentence is grammatical or not. Next, we are moving to the monitor theory, and this theory was developed by Krashen in 1982, and it was presented in terms of 5 hypotheses, as you can see. The learning is described as conscious process, one in which the learner's attention is directed to the rules and form of the language, while acquisition is responsible for fluency. It means that the learner can speak and understand well the language. So another theory is psychological perspective, and we are familiar with the behaviorism theory. It was based on the view that all learning, including language learning, occurs through a process of imitation, practice, reinforcement, and habit formation. Let's see. With behaviorism theory, we remember about Pavlov. He showed how a dog interact with the bell ringing and the food. And Skinner, he took this idea and expanded this and applied them to the learning language. And Skinner emphasized the importance of reinforcement or rewards after the design of language behavior. So it focused on observation behavior of the human and animal. And another theory is the constructive analysis hypothesis, or we can call CAH, and it was proposed to account for the role of the first and the second language learning, and the contrastive analysis hypothesis that where similarities existed between the first and the second language structure, and there would be no difficulty for the second language learning. This theory failed to predict errors that the second language learner were observed to make, and it predicted some errors that did not occur. And we move to cognitive psychology, and this theory requires learners' attention and effort. It controls the processing, requires mental effort, and takes attention away from other controlled processes. For example, when a teacher asks a student to analyze a text or analyze some language and identify which language structures are included in the test, so the student know how they use these rules by their own, and then they use their mind to learn the language, and the learners are invited to analyze the language by notice the pattern, deduce rules, and so on. So we call this the cognitive psychology. Oh, sorry. About connectism, this connect words or phrase to other words or phrases, as well as to events and the objects which occur at the same time, and it suggested that these link or connection are strengthened when learners are repeatedly exposed to linguistic stimuli in specific context. And other theory is processibility theory. It presents a way to relate underlying cognitive process to stage in the second language learners' development. And Tiananmen This theory was originally developed as a result of studies of the acquisition of a German word order, and later on the basis of research with second language learners of English. So the information you can look at on the screen, and I just pick up from the textbook. Another theory is interactionist perspective theory. So the language learning takes place through social interaction, and interlocutors adjust their speech to make it more accessible to learner. You can see the example, the children's interaction with their caregivers and peers, which is tailored to their linguistic and cognitive abilities, child-directed speech. And these adjustments include modification and simplifications in all aspects of language, including phonology, vocabulary, syntax, discourse, and paraphrasing, repeating, clarifying. And the second types of theory today I will present is social cultural perspective. So there is an intimate relationship between culture and mind, and that all learning is first social, then individual. And for example, you have a class with 20 students, but one of them very dominant personality, or somebody with a very particular characteristic. And one day that student is absent, he or she doesn't come to class, so we can see the teacher realized that the dynamic of the class changed. So it shows that social culture does not separate the individual from the context in which they learning, and the social context has an impact on the individual, and the individual by participating also influences the social context. Yeah, and other information from the textbook I will show you. So that's all for my part. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Do to continue.
Good morning, teachers and friends. So I'm gonna move on the last two parts of our presentation today is the learner language and instructions and SLA. So my part will answer the four questions. The first one, are there developmental sequences for second language acquisitions? 2, was language 2 learning similar to language 1 acquisitions? 3, how does instruction affect second language acquisition? And 4, what are the errors and feedback? So let's talk about the difference between language acquisition and language learning. As Ms. Hu told before, language acquisition tends to acquire fluency, and language learning tends to acquire correctness or accuracy. So we can see that acquisition is more implicit, and learning is explicit, and other characteristics are presented in this table. Let's talk about the developmental sequences. We know that language learning is based on, at least in part, on the internal processes, and not just on simple imitation or speech or environmental factors. For example, frequency of occurrence and feedback on error are very important for the developmental sequences. And language to learners acquire other grammatical features of the language in a predictable order. For example, the typical language 1 error in English is S. They put S on food and to express the plural instead of saying feet. So when you look at the slide here, you can see that different presents summarize the order is shown in this figure. And you can see that the higher boxes is higher accuracy than those in lower boxes. And within boxes, there are no clear pattern of difference. And he concluded that all the language learner, regardless of the language 1 background, they make the same mistakes, and the mistakes are predictable. So was language 2 learning similar to language 1 acquisition? So let's look at the two examples here. The first one, a cowboy girl and 3 grabbers in the mountain who sees. And example 2, Santa Claus ride and they taste. So you can see that they make the mistake in the third singular verb, the third singular person. So example 1 is made by the French, and example 2 is made by the Chinese students of English. And you can see that when we study French, and the French has the plural, singular, but when they study English, they make the same mistake with the Chinese students too. So, and we can see that is it just the modify for what I have just told before. I mean, when when the language make a study on the language acquisition, they see that the language 2 learning, like language 1, is governed by part of internal mechanisms. For example, here you see that the morphemes, when they study morphemes, plural, past tense, or verb in, they make the same mistakes and the similar accuracy order. I mean, the mistakes are predictable for all different ages and language 1 background. So let's talk about the language 1 influence. So when you look at the picture here, you can see that this is the development of a tree from a very young to a bigger one. And we can see that learners do not transfer from all the patterns, and they will discover similarities over time of learning. And some aspects of the language are more susceptible than others, like pronunciation and word order are more susceptible than grammar. So when they study the language 1, learners study the language. So with the pronunciation and word order, they are more susceptible than grammar. So, and also we have other findings from Klein and Purdue in 1993. So there were similarities in the interlanguage patterns of the learners, and the similarities were greatest in the early stage of SLA. So let's talk about the instruction and second language acquisitions. So we can see on the slides that the instruction may permit the learners to move to the stage faster, and they make the study more targeted, like the use of language 2 as Leibold and Spada in 2013. But although Carson's argue that with comprehensible input is enough to progress to the developmental stages. But teachers may hasten the learner progress to lower stages. And remember that instruction does not permit learner to skip stages, and they will gradually recognize the similarity between the language 1 and language 2, and they get more progress. The natural input. So in class, communication and content based in language teaching, the teachers will pay attention to the theme or teach a student the new language with the subject such as history or science, and they will enable students to get effective comprehensions and communication skills. But there are limitations because the students, they just practice the language inside the class, and they don't have much chance to practice the language outside the class. So the language seem to be not natural. And in a class, the students will work with their peers, but if the language to peer model, the language lack motivation to get beyond if their peer don't have much motivation to study. Let's talk about the errors and feedback. So in class, the teacher, if the teacher want to promote communication, so the teacher should just mention about the semantic and lexical errors, and the errors influenced by language 1. For example, she is wearing a skirt dress, so we see that in this situation, explicit information about how language 1 and language 2 differ in meaning, and a form-focused instruction and corrective feedback will help the students to get better. So in Alice in 2001 say that learners from communication and content-based classroom focus on form when instructional input and or corrective feedback is more explicit. So let's move to the conclusions. So when looking at the timelines, we can see that the SLA study has began in 1960s, and they moved from 1960s to 2008, and there are a lot of studies about SLA. And according to Alice, in 1994, more than 1,500 conferences to review the research of SLA. And in 2008, this review is published with more than 2,700 publications. So we can see that SLA is always a field that the linguists try to discover. So that's all for my presentation. So thanks for listening.
Okay, thank you for your informative presentation. And based on your presentation, I can make a conclusion in this way. There are a lot of theories of L2 learning, right? And you have just presented two perspectives. The first one is linguistics perspectives and psychological perspectives. To sum up, I think EFL learners learning and or acquisitions is based on some basic theories such as behaviorism, right? Behaviorism, and the famous one, the famous author is Skinner, as you have just presented with the dog study. And the second one, I think, is innate cognitive approaches, and the well-known scholars are Noam Chomsky and Stephen Krashen. Okay, And the next one is constructivism. It means that the student needs to construct the knowledge by themselves. They can interpret the knowledge. I mean that with the same input, but each individual has different interpretation. Okay, it means I say I'm tired now, but my student may think that the teacher wants to free us soon, or another may think that okay, the teacher needs something to eat or something. It means that each individual has their own interpretation. And humanism, or I think the last one is very important, is the social cultural perspective, right? So I have two questions for you, one for Miss Tu and one for Miss Tu. Sorry. The first question, you have just presented a lot of theories of auto learning and have just summarized some of them. And one theory of auto learning do you find the most influential to your English teaching? And the second question, what is the difference between language learning and acquisition? You got it? You got the two questions? The first question, what theory of auto learning do you find the most influential to your English teaching? And number two, what is the difference between language learning and language acquisition? That's it. That's the two questions. So can you answer now, because I'm going to go soon, I'm going to leave soon for the checkups. So can you give me a short answer now?
Yes, I will answer your question. Thank you for your question. So the theory that I am most interested in is social cultural theory. Because I think that the main point in this theory is the teacher has to scaffolding with the student in the classroom, and students they often work in group and discussing and negotiating, and while we ask them to do the task, and they are doing the cognitive task, and they are interacting with other people, interacting with the teachers, and using the mental process such as the memory, decision to making problem solving. And with the social culture theory, we will be scaffolding learners to reach the next level of them, and we can help them to share their ability, and they will tend to, and we can encourage them to work in the group and communicate and with each other. So they are conducting tasks, and they are also they also be pushed by the teacher, and can become more conscious in the classroom. Yeah, this is my opinion.
Okay, that's it. Okay, that's good. I agree with you. Some of your points, like for this perspective, social cultural perspective, we can say that the context affects the individual, as the individual also influences the context. I mean, they have two-way influence, and the keyword for this perspective is scaffolding, right? The teacher needs to give help students scaffold the knowledge, and give some models or something to give them a framework, okay, to help them to interpret the knowledge by themselves. And you can use some kind of activities or in group work or pair work, discussion, debate or something to boost their metacognition. And the teacher needs to use the learning strategies, and learning strategies we will know more for the upcoming sections presented by your classmates as well. Maybe Mr. Bin or someone else, I don't remember exactly, but you will discover more about learning strategies, because most of master students, when they conduct their master thesis, they often, I don't know, but they are really into this issue. I mean, learning strategies, many things to discover here. So I think it's very useful for you too. Okay. And the second question, I want to hear your answer now.
Yeah, I would like to answer the second question, the difference between acquisition and learning. So we can see that acquisition is more implicit and learning is explicit. As mean, learning is monitored by the teacher's teachings much more than acquisition. And acquisition is subconscious, but learning is more conscious, and the students have to study with the supervisions or the teaching of the teachers. For example, the grammar point in a logical way, and acquisition tends to be favor of the attitude of the students more than the attitude of the students. And acquisition happens in the stable order of acquisition, but learning move from simple to complex, and the students will observe the language gradually to move faster to the
Got it. That's the theory. So can you give me an example?
So for example, for example, when I want to teach my students a new grammar structure, so I will let my student with TBLT approach, I will let my students do the task, and I will observe, facilitate, and at the very final stage, I will make the student notice. That's when we call the noticing hypothesis, and they will notice the difference with what they know before and with what the teacher showed them at the language focus, and then they will correct the language, the new grammar structure point. And at this time, the teacher will play the role to correct the student mistakes. So I think that's the language learning.
That's language learning. How about language acquisition?
Yeah, how about the language acquisitions? Maybe we set the context for the students to practice and communicate within the context, and the students will develop their communication skill through times in the stable order, like the behaviorism theory. So the dog will one by one, or the baby will day by day he will get the higher knowledge.
Yes. You have just mentioned the baby for acquisition. That's right. Okay. So I think the examples for the two terms here. For the first one is language acquisition is for a baby. Okay, the baby, because you don't apply any intervention of language learning about grammar rules or anything for the baby. The baby just like for my baby. Okay, my baby is an example. Like she's got 5 years old now, and we haven't taught her anything about English. We just speak with her, speak English with her, and we let her acquire the English language naturally. Even we didn't correct any mistake made by her. We just let her be, and she just imitates the way we speak, and we were so surprised when one day she just repeated what we have done before, we have spoken before. That is language acquisition, because it is a subconscious process, as you mentioned. Okay, she didn't know that she is acquiring a language. She just imitates. Your language acquisition is closely related to questions theory and Chomsky theory. Okay, it's quite, it is called innate cognitive approaches. Okay, so and whereas language learning is a conscious process. Okay, conscious process, because student needs a formal instructions. Okay, formal instruction by the teacher. Okay, the teacher gives them the rule. They need to go to the class and they join some class meetings with the instruction of the grammar rules, and they need to do some drills, exercises. Okay, that's it. Okay, that is called language learning. Okay, the key word for the two terms, the differences between the two terms is the subconscious process and conscious process. Okay, and another difference that the meaningful interaction, whereas formal instruction. Okay, and for language acquisition, we use the communicative acts, whereas grammar rules are used for learning, language learning. That's it. That's the very obvious differences between the two terms here. So when we use the words acquire and the word learn, we need to know the differences between the two. Okay, the two terms. That's it. And you know, throughout your answers, I can know that you comprehend, you understand what have you just presented, and I am really happy for that, because you know, there is a theories, and the way you interpret the knowledge from, you know, from something written in the textbook is different. But anyway, we need to have you know, a common understanding of the theories. And yeah, I just want to share with you about something about my example about the language acquisition for my brief case. Okay, I think we can stop now for a moment, and I will get back soon. While waiting for me, you can the next group, you can show your slide, or you can discuss something with Miss Du and Miss Tu. Okay, you can discuss now, but I need to go for now for the checkup. Okay, I will get back very soon. Thank you. See you again. See you very soon. Okay.
Thank you, teacher.